Hi guys, thanks so much for watching. Speaking of, I'm Stephanie, and today I have Gary Earl, who considers himself to be a disruptive force for good. And he has an incredible story to tell, and I'm so excited to talk to him today and learn more and share everything with you. So thank you so much for being here.
Stephanie, thanks so much. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you today. I really am grateful for this opportunity.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure. Tell us, what does it mean to be a disruptive force for good? That is something that most people probably have never heard of.
Yeah, I don't know that it's an official title, although it is my official title and one given to me by someone else a while back, another story, I suppose. But I think I'll have to get into my story at some point to tell you why half of my life was about sort of classic approaches to health, well-being, and actually even my own personal life. And then there was a radical change halfway through that. And that's what led me to be what I would consider a disruptor. But I think people sometimes think disruptive is bad, and I don't. I think the best way to a new idea is to throw a wrench into the current thinking. And if you think about it, it's just sort of taking a pause on how and what and why we do things today to think about, are there better ways to do it? So all with a slant for good, right? At the end of the day, we should all be able to live the best we possibly can, live together, right, in unity, all the ways we think about it, and make money, quite frankly, not personal money in the sense that I've got to make a lot of money doing this, although it's fair to do that, as much as it's all equitably in a form of an equitable equation actually coming together. So I like to disrupt the current thinking in order to achieve good.
Well, that is amazing. So tell us about your story, how you said the first half of your career, you worked as a healthcare executive and it was defined by one thing, and then you had that change. So tell us about that and what was the impetus for change?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something I have to think about almost every day, because I still today at 62 still have to think about, what does that mean about what I do, what's called purpose today, and at least purpose for me. So I'll go back there for a minute. So I spent almost 40 years in this industry, and I love this industry. I am passionate about it. I'm crazy about it. And I'm at this point actually doubling down to sort of come back into it, because there's so many amazing things that are happening. So everybody looks at our challenges and our problems, and they are challenges and problems, but I see incredible opportunity for solutions. So I'm really bullish right now on the industry. And my wife of 38 years would say, oh my gosh, she's going back to work for a second half of career, I guess. So although I don't have a paying job and don't want one necessarily, I'm glad to be with people like you and others that want to sort of listen along to this. So back to your question, for almost 20 years in my original sort of approach to business, I came out of college, I got a job. I met this wonderful woman who for some reason has managed to hang with me all this time, and that's a gift in its own. Truly, she's much better than I am. But I just wanted to be a salesman to make a lot of money. I mean, that's just to be honest with you. And so I decided I'll be a salesperson. And back then she said, what are you going to sell? I said, well, I don't know, pencils, cars, metal, like you can write, you can do any cereal boxes. I mean, you can sell anything. So she was getting her MBA in Philadelphia at that point where we met, and she was studying this merger of these two giant companies. At that point in 1982, the biggest merger of two American companies was Connecticut General and the insurance company in North America, INA. And now if you put together CIGNA, that's Cigna. So she said, why don't you sell insurance? I said, sure. So I went into that. Now, I will digress like I normally do for just a second to say I was raised on a farm in Pennsylvania. I worked there my whole life as a kid. My grandfather's 600-acre farm. I milked cows, even through college. I chose to go to college locally so I could stay and help my dad and my grandfather and everybody with the farm. And I learned about well-being. I learned about financial well-being. I learned about social well-being, community well-being, of course, healthy well-being, and many other elements of that. And because of that, it kind of said, well, then getting into the healthcare field makes sense, because you're going to, you can bring something that you believe in, right? So, and Grandpa taught us to go to bed at 7:30 and get up at 4. Well, I don't believe in that, but when you're on a farm, you do. So here's the point. I thought selling insurance makes sense. And so for the next almost 20 years, I had the great privilege to be at Cigna at that point, 13, 14 years, underwriting, finance, sales, product, leadership, all the things that you kind of commonly do to get up there. But I was sort of scratching at something. Something wasn't right. And I thought, well, we're doing good. And I'm still a fan of David Cordani and Cigna and the whole team. But I didn't feel like we were delivering what I thought at that point was going to be excellence. And so I became a consultant. And I worked for this giant consulting firm called Watson. And when you're a consultant, people think you're the smartest person in the room. And honestly, I've got a lot of friends that are consultants, and they are the smartest person in the room. I'm not. But I was able for about 6-8 years to spend time working with companies and communities to really understand at the root cause what was creating health. And then it kind of dawned upon me like an awakening that I think I was going the wrong way. I was trying to just make myself a lot of money, and probably because of my ego and pride, trying to make myself a name, when really it is about this common good, or it should be to me. And that's what Grandpa really had taught me. So I had this transformation, and I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just try to find roles that now allow me to do good. And so the second half of that career, the last 20 years, I was able to go into becoming an employer. So now I'm responsible for 55,000 employees. I have to move my family from Connecticut to Las Vegas. I mean, I have to leave my horses behind. And I did bring my Labrador, who hated living in Vegas, but to quite frankly, a great community to run Caesars Entertainment and run the productivity, health, well-being, and happiness for their 55,000 employees and their families. And it was there that I started, because of the leadership there believed in making money by doing good. So pouring into people in order to pour back into the business. So it's really a great concept, although many don't think that way. They allowed us to do extraordinary things. And we were considered early innovators back in the year 2000. And we put in programs and models. We ran collaboratives to draw people together. And together we came up with a great system that actually improved the health, productivity, and economics of that population, as well as the company, as well as the community, because we always invited the community in. So I sort of found my way in this path. Well, we sold the company, and as you and I have shared, that was the first year that I decided to get on a bicycle and go across America and talk to people about health, but that's another story. And anyhow, so then I went back to work for the insurance companies, and I loved it. I worked back at Cigna for another 5 years, working for David. I worked at United Healthcare. I worked at Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, back then called WellPoint. And these are great companies. They're a huge part of the ecosystem design, but they're part of a giant ecosystem. Right? They don't own, nor should they own or control the system itself. And so because of that, I just decided this probably wasn't for me. I did have one last commercial job, and that was the CEO of the Teachers Health Trust in Nevada. My wife and I had relocated back to Connecticut, back to Las Vegas, to South Carolina, where we live today, back to Las Vegas a third time, to actually pour into the 18,000 teachers of Clark County and into the community. And, we proved that out, did that job. And then for the last 4 years, I sit as a board of advisor. I pour into people. I come alongside folks like you to just try to promote and share messages. And I've had great fortune to do more cycling tours and things like that, and be part of a lot of innovations that are happening today. So I would say at least the majority of me really wants to build a legacy of love and good for people. No one has to know who I was, but the people we impact every day, that's what matters. So.
What do you think the trigger was when you made that switch? Because it sounded like it was a definitive point in time.
Yeah, it was a definitive point in time. I had been tasked by America's largest shoe manufacturer back then, because most shoes are manufactured overseas, not in America. It's very expensive to make shoes here. So it was a large company. I was consulting for them, and they were having a big problem down in Isabela, Puerto Rico. So they had a giant manufacturing facility out there. And by the way, it's Puerto Rico. It's hot, it's humid, no air conditioning. As we know, certain populations and races and different ethnic groups have different, ranges of diabetes or hypertension or overweight, based on sometimes genetics, sometimes characteristics, or even behavior. But at this point, we knew we had a diabetic population, but we had an extraordinarily huge diabetic issue. So I went down to do a study. And so, I did spend one night at the Ritz in San Juan, and then I remember going over, and it was great. And I had this little house that I stayed in for 2 weeks. I got to walk the streets, and I got to talk to all the employees and their families. I got to watch children play soccer, which they can kill me in soccer. It was crazy. And what I sort of dug up, because people are like onions, right? If you keep asking questions like you do, you're great at that. You peel them back like an onion. You get down to a root. And so what I was discovering was that although this was a great American company and still is today, that really was meaning well, the way they had organized their human resource management around people was that they were creating what's called control in the workplace, meaning they were stealing people's sense of destiny, stealing control, not on purpose, but by the way we brought sort of our thinking into a beautiful island to say, no, you can't go to the soccer game. You have to stay here and keep whittling over this hot fire because you're making heels on shoes. Something started to go off and say, like, aren't we looking at the wrong thing? So I can negotiate health plans and bring in providers and incentivize employees and all these engage, right? At the end of the day, the problem is how we are treating the human in the workplace. So we had to change the sensitivity training. I mean, how simple is that? Well, 3 years later, we saw not only had they gone from ratcheting non-compliant diabetes down to managing, but actually changing diabetes. A type 2 diabetic can change to become a non-diabetic, right? So type 1, that's a whole different story. But, and then we made access more available. But we had to look at the community. And so so that was an aha for me. I came back, said to my wife, I think we're missing the point. And I'll give you this sort of statistic, and someone brighter than me can look it up. But right now, still today, in 2020, we spend 90 to 95% of our money in America, and I'm talking about America, right? Focused on you and I as the individual and how we behave. And that's great because you know what? I want to provide you services, especially during COVID-19, behavioral health service. I want to get you access. I want to do the best I can because of the stresses that we face. But more than 50%, more than 50, and some say 65% of what creates health is in the socioeconomic conditions. It's in the context. Place matters, right? So food insecurity, transportation policy, racism, whether it be in the neighborhood, in the workplace, these are tough conversations, but these are the elements that are actually driving many of our outcomes. And despite our best efforts to make treatments more effective and costs more manageable, we still have a rise in obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and other chronic diseases. So something's amiss. So my aha 20 years ago, and the aha I still think we still have to come to today, is what are we not seeing or investing in understanding? And that's not faulting employers, insurance, government, providers, anybody. That's just saying, are we looking at the root level of what creates this issue? So I was able 20 years ago to do that, and it changed my life.
How do you start to make a change? Because you had such a cool experience where you got to go into, Isabela and see the people and how they were living and working and think about ways that you could personally change it. So how do you keep doing that? Or what are ways that you see that when somebody sees something, they can say, oh, I can start to make that change?
Yeah, that's actually maybe one of the best questions anybody's asked. And I mean that because it cuts right to my heart and right to the core. I'll use this word. I don't know this is the only or right word, but first of all, it starts with courage. You know what, the industry, well, not just healthcare. I mean, we all need jobs. Most of us, right? We want a job. You have to have courage to be able to say, I have to question that. I'm just not sure about that. And that's not easy. I've got a lot of friends and colleagues who have run companies much bigger than mine. Some of them, like Chris McSwain, have been on your show that ran, the domestic piece of Walmart, Whirlpool, and others. It takes a lot of courage to say, I'm not sure. And then to be able to stand up in front of people and then explain why you're not sure. Now, so you need courage to say, I'm not going to stand for the status quo. When I was running employee benefits the first time from 2001 to 2005, I think it trends back then running about 7.5% to 8.5%. And a lot of good friends and a lot of good companies who said, good news was we were 7.3, so I get a bonus. I'm in, right? Or better news, I'm at -3. Or gosh, I'm at 11.5, so I'm in trouble with the boss, right? Mm-hmm. You have to have the courage to be able to go in and build that relationship with all the entities, right? Internally and externally, to say we need to review and think about what's unique and different to our company or community And now how do we get about doing it? So I think, courage is number one, and it's probably the best word I could say. It also takes intelligence. I am not by any means the smartest person, but I had a great job in underwriting and I had another great job in actuarial pricing. So I love mathematics. So there is an incredible asset to this industry. Her name is Dr. Pam Hymel. She's the Chief Medical Officer for Walt Disney Company. You've probably seen her on Good Morning America a number of times because of COVID and Disney trying to open their parks. Just a great friend. I'm privileged that she's a personal friend and somebody I've just been connected with for a long time. I didn't know Pam back in the 90s, but I read studies that she had done through NASA and some of the work that she's done as a physician and an epidemiologist. And I started to take those mathematical equations, and hers were productivity based on absence. And I just basically built multipliers and I moved them over and translated them into what would be healthcare costs. Well, you have to have the intelligence, right? That doesn't make me smarter than anybody, but I use that little bit of intelligence to go to a CFO of the world's largest gaming company and say, if I spend $11 million on bringing mental health on site, opening 11 behavioral health centers in the casino, I will 4 times our money. An ROI of 4 to 1, no, that's not possible. Well, guess what? We had an ROI of 5.6 to 1 documented to the point that Dr. Bill Wang, one of the greatest medical directors from Coca-Cola a long time ago, flew out and said, what are you doing? Right? Well, I took enough intelligence, modified it to convince a CFO and a CEO and a board of directors to make the investment, knowing from a personal perspective that it would actually deliver the results as long as we brought it together. But it took the courage to sit in front of these people. And so I'm not the most courageous guy. My 6 grandkids would tell you, I'll run from a snake down here on the island in a heartbeat. But in this industry, I think what's going to be successful, and that's what I'm seeing in these younger people that are just coming up with I've got a great idea. And we may have to temper pieces of that to help them explain the idea, but it takes courage and it takes intelligence, and get out and do it.
That really is unbelievable. And that's one thing that stands out to me when you talk about your career is that you've continuously had that courageous ability to say, you know what, I think we're not on the same page. I can't, if you're not going to let us take this to the next level for the real purpose, I'm going to have to go. And that's really unbelievable. Most people you have that fear of like, oh my gosh, this is a great job I'm providing for my family. And what do you think gives you that ability to just say, you know what, it's time to go and tackle the next thing?
Yeah, that's really great. And honestly, many interviewed a lot. No one's kind of cutting close to those heartfelt things that you are. No, I mean that sincerely, because I'd like to say like, oh, it's the way I am. I was created this way. My grandfather taught me, whatever. I'll tell you, I'm lucky, right? I had a bunch of, I came out of college with an art degree. I had no experience in anything, and I was smart enough to be able to talk my way into a sales job. From there, as I told you before, I developed that into, no, this is not a job, this is a purpose. And then when I thought about the purpose, but at this point now, I've done well. So I'm not the richest person in the world, nor do I want to be, but I'm just, I've done well. So I did have the courage to walk away from roles because I had a buffer. I mean, and that's tough to even say, because I don't want somebody out there hearing this to go like, well, you lucked out. And I did. But at the same time, I'd say, what is life all about? So I've come to learn at this age, it's about purpose. Purpose today is different than it was back last February or this past February for me. And yeah, I've got, great privileges to do things around that. But to me, it was sort of what Grandpa used to say is like, at the end of the day, our job is to feed all the families, not just ours. It's to feed the community. And, if we can go to bed at night, we got a little milk on the table. Of course, we were a dairy farmer, so we always had milk on the table and everywhere else. That's good enough, right? You don't have to be a somebody, right? You just have to be somebody to everybody.
I love that what your grandfather said, our job isn't just to feed our family, it's to feed every family.
Oh, it's the community.
I mean, that really seems like exactly what you've been doing, except not feeding. You've just taken it into, the healthcare space. And caring for, so it's just not feeding them, it's caring for them and making these changes for people. I don't think anybody could take away that you definitely have some fire within you, just like you told us the story at the beginning of the interview where your wife said, what are you going to sell? And you said, I could sell pencils, I could sell whatever. And I was thinking, good God, there's no way I could ever say, well, I could sell pencils and make a living. There's definitely something you have inside of you.
The chutzpah or the burning that's inside of me has been clearly planted through a legacy of other people, right? And then I was fortunate enough to sort of build upon that and have the confidence and have leadership that believed. So the intelligence turns into, hey, you prove it out, then I'll keep going, right? So when we opened the 11 behavioral health centers at Caesars, that transformed into 14 what we call living well centers and beyond. And now we've got everything, and everybody's, loving people to life is the term I love to use. I hate that term. I love you to death. I'm going to love you to life. They became sort of taglines, but that's because that's the way we felt about it. So when we sold the company that I mentioned earlier in 2005, I did go to my wife because I had transformed. And I said to her, we've been privileged. We're leaving a major corporation. We can pretty much do anything we want. Then the incoming leadership at that point didn't have the same philosophy. So it was sort of like, okay, so I'm freed up to do things. And that's when we came up with the concept of going across America on what was called the Health Awareness Tour, which was taking a team or building a team of cyclists that were actually health evangelists or self-proclaimed health evangelists. And we rode across America 3,100 miles, 31 days under a nonprofit that my wife and I built called the Health Awareness Tour out of Health, Hope, and Purpose was our nonprofit. And our message and our mission was just to deliver a conversation and any way we can come alongside you and love you to life, love you to health, right? And it was always based on one pedal, 1 mile, one person at a time. And so we trained what we thought was a lot, found out we didn't, and we set off across the desert floors and went ocean to ocean in order to deliver this message, sort of Paul Revere. But that's who I am. I thought Grandpa would have been delighted, the fact that, you know what, I can afford it. So I'm going. I just didn't know what I was doing. I risked the life of other people, but I'm so grateful it worked out. And we've done it again since with the 2013 tour and things like that. But
what did you talk to these people when you had the chance? What's the most important thing you got to tell them or ask them?
Yeah, well, we asked a lot of questions because we tried to take all the data, and I wouldn't even call it data, try to take everything we learned back so we could build better programs for the future. As I said, we went again in 2013 on a whole different premise because of what we learned. But what we did back then was we actually had a little card, and our partners, Cigna was a partner, MetLife was a partner, Delta Dental was a partner, and there was a lot of partners back then who raised a lot of money to do this, although we lived hard on the road, if you will. But we put together this little card back then. It was really cool. And it was meant to be one of those cards that you could take back to your refrigerator, and it gave you 10 tips. And some of them are really simple. Drink more water. Like we just say that, but it's in front of you every day, and get more sleep. And this is 2005, right? So little simple things. They all had a factoid. Websites were becoming more popular, so they all had a link, right? So you get information off the ADA, all sorts of different places. But you signed your name, just your first name and the date and your city, and you tore it off and you made a commitment to live a better life. So we collected over 200,000 of those cards across America, and on July 30th, 2005 at the Liberty Bell, we stopped and we had Ben Franklin, the Philadelphia Ben Franklin person, stand next to us, and at the Liberty Bell we declared freedom for those couple 100,000 people, and we just did the best we could. We left them simple tips, and I will tell you, I remember walking with this wonderful woman and her husband in New Mexico somewhere, and she turned and she was talking about taking walks after dinner. And she turned and she said, you know what? She said, he had walked away. He said, I'll make a commitment to walk with you. And she turned and she said, it's going to save our marriage.
Oh my gosh.
So, I mean, yeah, I want you to lose a little weight and I want you to be a little more heart healthy. It's going to save our marriage. That's enough, right? That's enough for me. So then when we did the tour again in 2013, this time sponsored by Anthem, and called the Journey for Health Tour, much bigger, much fancier, everything else, but and partners like Boys and Girls Club and Marvel Comics and Disney and others, it was just a big deal. But we then took all that learning and we published Everyday Healthy Habits. We led people on journeys and pathways. Of course, technology was so good that we had kids and boys and girls clubs. We spoke in 21 boys and girls clubs across America. And we had these children and their families just like really engaged and competing with us because we had GPS on our uniforms so they could, together, we'd leave a cycling bike in each one of their clubs and a stationary bike. And it was rigged to our equipment so they could actually ride with us. So an 11-year-old might ride for 20 minutes and a 16-year-old rides for 35, but they're competing against us, and they were able to follow us on our geo-access to see who's ahead.
What was the mission of the second tour?
The mission of the second tour was much more around, I think I might have said it earlier, what I call the equitable equation, which is it's individuals, companies, and communities. And it's the three of us understanding that if we can begin to explore and discover what health is to each one of us, which is unique, then we can come up with common ways in which to solve the problem. So if I'm, a small town like Spartanburg, South Carolina, which we've worked in, majority are small employers, but just up the road in less than an hour is Greenville, where you've got major manufacturing and Michelin USA and Saab and big companies, right? If we sort of look at fundamentally what is that root cause, which again might be social environments, it might be, it might be the way we treat each other or see each other, which we have to be honest about that. Then we can come together around things like food insecurity or food, we call them food deserts, but now they're food swamps, right? I got too much fast food. And find ways in which to do commonalities and common ways to bring about a solution. And so when the equitable equation has a chance to sort of come together, the company realizes, hey, it's kind of a form of social responsibility, but I would call it sort of the way I think a new age socially symbiotic, right? So I don't just take money and give it to the MS, which I should. I mean, those are great. But at the same time, my social responsibility is not to give away money. My social responsibility is to find ways in which to enhance that environment, that community. And so I might want to shift the way I distribute money or bring in partnerships.
All the things that you just said going together, it's in one way harder because it's not just making a donation to somebody, but on many ways it's actually easier because you have all these people around who also want that same thing. They want the community to be great and they want to have a great living situation and work situation, and everybody wants, the companies in the city to be profitable so the city continues to thrive. Right. So it's so great to be able to tap into those resources and have everybody come together.
Well, we all can win in that equation. So, but we also all have to put in. And so back to the individual. So, many, not all, many will say, well, it's up to my employer. It's up to my government. It's up to all these other things. Well, that's true. They have an obligation, a responsibility at some level in place, but it's up to me too. Do I go to my next door neighbor and buy food for them because they can't get out of the house? Do I know my neighbor, right? Do I make an effort to make a difference for them? Because to the extent, so I live on a small island and I've got very few neighbors, if you will, but guess what? To the extent that my island's healthy, I benefit. I mean, I actually financially benefit, right? So how about the fact we pay into the Social Security system, and we have Medicare and Medicaid, and we have very complicated systems. Well, if we could actually reduce the rates of chronic conditions and diseases, then we're all going to make money off that, right? Because a non-compliant diabetic is costing about $18,000 a year, and I'm healthy and I'm costing, not a lot, but still, right? So, well, then bully for me and not for them? No. How do I come alongside them? Because I'm going to make money off that. My Social Security benefit will go up, my costs go down, which, by the way, takes away from the federal deficit. It's a tough, big formula, but when you put it into a formula that you can actually take by stages and steps back to having the courage and the appetite to do it, I think we can do this. So I'm really encouraged today that we can solve the problem way before I'm gone. And I used to think I'd be way dead before it happens.
Hearing everything, it's very clear what a disruptive force for good is. And so how do you use that, or how do you take that philosophy into the work that you do now, working as an investor and on the boards and all those things?
So all I do is try to come alongside people. I mean, at the end of the day, whether I invest in a company or a company invests in me, and I don't really do a lot these days. I look for good people trying to achieve good. And you can say great people are great. The point of it is, I have the privilege to look at all these companies that are gurgling up almost by the hour, probably 10 emails from them, you included, right? And I look to find people like yourself who are trying to deliver a message of good to humans, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come alongside them. And I sometimes can just put my arm around a 28-year-old person, male or female, who just raised $30 million in a seed round, right? And say, that's awesome, but how do you treat your people? You know, or what are you thinking about tomorrow? Or is it all about the money, right? And by the way, most of these people, because they are good, they're willing to listen to an old, person like me at this point. I come along products that I think are going to deliver the outcomes that we need. I am really sold out to a couple of them right now. One who's in the behavioral health space that I'm just really high on and bullish on, and two that are in the healthcare, pure, healthcare conditional space. Same thing. These are leaders that have just done amazingly well. They've got a great heart. Yeah, they want to make money, and there's nothing wrong with that. My job might just be to let's just not focus on the money. And I will tell you that's not fair, because most of them don't just want to focus on the money. I'll call one out, Stephanie Tilenius, who is the founder and CEO of Vita Health out of San Francisco. This woman ran eBay. This woman is so much smarter than me. It's ridiculous that I can be her friend. And Stephanie, and I'll let Stephanie someday tell her own story, but a personal story with her dad that had her leave eBay and other major finance. She was basically in the fintech side. She came into healthcare, and she's got one of the strongest companies focused on chronic conditions that I've ever seen today. You know why? Because her dad shouldn't have died. Mm-hmm. And when she suffered through that, she said that the heck with all this other stuff. I want to make money by doing good. Mm-hmm. And I mean, and I just get the privilege to come alongside them and say, let me coach you. If I can open a door, because I know a lot of people, sure, whatever. I just want to help people out. And I want to help my 6 grandkids. So, so I virtually not really teach because they have their own stuff, but I spend a lot of time. I read to my grandchildren every week. I started what's called Pop-Pop's Reading Hour. Actually wrote a book for them, has each one of them in the book. So I published just for them a book that they can each see themselves living on an island. I bury treasures out here, so they know that from summers here. So it's fun. And I run on the weekends what's called Pop-Up Silly Science Sundays. And so we do science experiments. We've blown up my wife's kitchen too many times. It's crazy. But you know what? So I get to pour into people, and that's what matters.
Oh my gosh. It doesn't sound like you have much spare time. You're filling it with some kind of good in every little bit.
Well, my wife's not home, so I would say, as I mentioned to you, I also ride a lot, and I'm training. Hopefully, at 65, I'm going to go across America again. Oh my God. working on a template for what that tour would look like. She refuses, so I literally can't say it loud, but I don't think she's anywhere around. So I'm going to do it.
Oh my God. I love that. Well, on that note, is there anything that I haven't covered?
And this is just from my heart. It's not like a tagline, but today's challenges really are our opportunities. We can actually beat all of this. And I'm certainly not only speaking of COVID-19, and I understand and respect the challenges we face. Healthcare challenges have been around since the 50s. Remember, before the 50s, we didn't study healthcare, right? Your doctor came to the farmhouse and you gave him a chicken, and it was literally that way. It is so complicated today, but we can actually change this. And as we know, that healthcare is, if you look at the GDP, GNP, you look at any other financial element around the globe, it is our biggest obstacle we face, but the opportunities are in front of us. So if I was a young person, and I feel young, coming back in today, man, I'm as wired and excited for those people. And so keep coming in, raise money, look for people like myself and people that have much more than I have, and let us come alongside you, because together we really can make a difference.
I love that. Thank you so much. I really loved our conversation. You're such an inspiring guy. You are clearly brilliant despite your waves.
I'm not brilliant. I'm an art major. Painting in the background.
You did that?
No, I didn't.
Oh,
I bought that one, but No, forget it. I was never a very good artist. That's why I'm a salesman.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure talking to you, and thank you all for watching. Bye.